I'm Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune, and I want to welcome you to the 2022 Texas Tribune Festival. This is the 12th year our nonprofit news org has been convening the biggest names in politics and policy from across Texas and around the country to discuss the most pressing issues and the most interesting ideas of our day. At the Tribune, we believe events like this one are journalism, consistent with our public service mission to educate and engage our friends and neighbors. If you believe in that mission, if you believe a more informed Texas is a better Texas, become a Texas Tribune member. Go to texastribune.org/join to give during our fall drive, when the first $50,000 in contributions will be generously matched by our friends at the Lowy Law Firm in Austin. Now, whether or not you're a member, we're excited you're taking part in our latest and greatest TribFest, which has more than 350 speakers and more than 120 compelling interviews and panel discussions. I think you'll especially enjoy this session, one of 7 we're presenting virtually, featuring the best-selling author Pete Souza, who was the White House photographer during the Reagan and Obama administrations. In that role, Pete spent more time in the Oval Office than almost any person in history. During the Obama years alone, he was inside the presidential bubble for more than 25,000 hours. And took nearly 2 million pictures. Our conversation was recorded on September 19th, 2022, about a week before the publication of Pete's new book, The West Wing and Beyond: What I Saw Inside the Presidency, a behind-the-scenes look at the personalities, intrigues, and details that comprise the most powerful job in America. Pete Souza, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
The book's great, Pete. You know, I got to interview a lot of people who put books out. I say I like the book. Pro tip, I don't always like the book. This is actually a book that could have been twice as long. I thought this was wonderful, and every single picture told a story, and I could not put it down.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was this was my COVID project, working on this during COVID.
Say about that. I want to understand the process. Now, you described this book as your visual documentation of what you saw inside the American presidency. And you've done a number of books of photos before. You probably have enough photos that you've not published in books right now that you could do a whole bunch more books, right? But this is one in a series of books you've done. And the time frame in which you do it is not necessarily about taking the pictures, because the pictures have already been taken. So tell me, what is the start to finish process? What's the assembly line for a book like this?
Well, I wanted to do a book about what it was like inside the presidential bubble without showing the president, just some of the things that I saw along the way, introduce people to some of the White House staff that you might not know about, but that make the presidency function. And so I started with probably, I'm going to say, maybe a rough edit of 500 pictures, and then worked with a book designer, the same one that I did the Obama book with, over the course of a year, really, to try to get the right pictures, the right sequence, the right sections. And in the back of my mind, I was always keeping in mind what I was going to write. And but I did the writing last.
Well, the writing was the new material, right? Every photo in this book is a photo you had taken. You didn't take original photos for this book. Right. And you said it was your COVID project. You did this during lockdown. You know, many of us during lockdown did things that we don't really remember or didn't particularly enjoy, but this must have been a fun thing to go back and remember what it was like in that very particular moment to be doing this work.
Yes, and I was joined by one of the White House photo editors that worked for me in the process of selecting down, culling down the images. And we did this by Zoom for the most part.
Kind of amazing what we've learned about how we can get our work done not being in the same place.
Oh, for sure.
Right? Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that. So give us a sense of the size of the White House photography staff. As a practical matter, what does it mean to be a White House photographer or the White House photographer? How many people are around you? What's that apparatus like?
So there were 3 other White House photographers. We also covered the vice president, his solo events,
Right.
and the First Lady, so her solo events.
Yeah.
And then any big public event, the other photographers on my staff would also be there because oftentimes the press angle is the better picture at these big events. So I wanted to make sure, since we're documenting for history,
right,
that we had all the angles covered at the big events. I pretty much did all the behind the scenes stuff with President Obama, meaning in the Oval Office, Situation Room, on Air Force One, so on and so forth.
But you had other people who worked with you who shot events that didn't require that kind of special access.
Yes.
Right. And of course, the big public events are all photographed by people out in the media and by others. And so in some ways, there's already a photographic record of those events, but you're photographing them for a different reason and for a different use.
Exactly. Right? I mean, all of our images end up at the National Archives. All of them. Right. There are none that are selected and not, transferred to the National Archives at the end of the administration. All the images are sent.
Right. So it's a public record, and those belong to us. It's a public record.
Exactly. That's the primary function of the job of my office, is documenting the presidency for history.
Right. Yeah. So the 8 years of the Obama administration, there are a lot of statistics that you cite in terms of the amount of work that you put together. The one that really jumped out at me was that you flew with President Obama. This is just the part flying with him. 1,442,242 miles.
Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't quite make it to 1.5, because that would have been a nice round number,
It would have been. But that you calculated that's something like 5 trips around the globe or something, isn't that? It was like some...
No, it's like 58.
58 trips around the globe. See, I went into journalism not to do math, Pete.
Yeah.
So that's okay, so it's a lot. Let's say it's a lot of trips around the globe, ultimately.
It's a lot of flying.
It's a lot of flying, yeah. This book is, let me hold up the book, by the way. The book is, first of all, it's a lovely book. It's a beautiful piece just to have around, but the contents of it, of course, are up to it. The book is divided into several sections. There's a section on the West Wing, subsections on things like the Cabinet Room, the Oval Office, the Outer Oval. Well, we're going to show some pictures in a little while. There's the People's House. This is more the public piece of the White House. And then you have a section on the road where you're traveling with the president. Again, that's flying on Air Force One, but it's also all the events that you do out in the world, and it's what you refer to as the protective bubble. And I want to talk about all that in the context of showing some photos. So we're going to put some photos up here, and I want to ask you about them. I could have picked any 6.
Right.
There are so many great photos in the book, but these 6 necessarily just spoke to me. They jumped out at me. The first one we're going to put up here is a picture taken in the Oval Office. This was taken on January 20th, 2017. It is right before President Obama stops by the Oval Office for the last time as president. Talk about how this picture came to be. I was struck by, among other things, the perspective and where you must have taken the picture from to get that perspective.
Yeah, I'd say most of the time, I would just photograph things as they happened, and there was no pre-planning necessarily. But for this one, the symbolic aspect of him leaving the Oval Office for the last time is what I was preparing for.
Right.
And so I got a ladder with a super wide angle lens, and I was prepared for that scenario. Yeah. This scene that we're looking at happened before that, and it just so happened that Ferial Govashiri, and who is President Obama's personal aide, and Brian Mosteller, the director of Oval Office operations, were basically taking one last look to make sure that we weren't leaving anything behind, any papers or anything like that.
Right.
And so that's how I got this photograph up on a ladder with a super wide angle lens.
One of the things I love about it is the rug. Mm-hmm. And the message that is within the frame. And now this may be something that you as a photographer caught as you were up there on the ladder, and you said, I'm going to capture this in a way that this is right there in the foreground. But the message, which really could be the whole message of the Obama years, Pete, is written right there on the rug. Each of us is dependent fundamentally upon the welfare of all of us. That's really an Obama message, and what a perfect coda to those 8 years. right?
It's an Obama message. It's actually a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. And if it's okay, I want to read another sentence from that speech that Roosevelt gave, because I think it even this is quoting Theodore Roosevelt. We can keep our government on a sane and healthy basis. We can make and keep our social system what it should be, only on condition of judging each man, not as a member of a class, but on his worth as a man. Maybe politically incorrect to say, just man, but you get the point.
The message, right, of course. Yeah, well, again, very Obama. Well, it's a gorgeous photograph. And it just, again, one of the things that I found so striking about the photos in this book is we think we know the White House. We think we know the presidency. What we're shown every day, what we've seen on the news, what we see in popular culture is one view of this. You had a view that none of us ever gets to have. And so the angles and the perspective, to me, really struck. And again, seeing the Oval Office in this context, I thought was amazing. Let's go on to the next photo, which in some ways is an unremarkable photo. It's a photo of the White House Situation Room. And again, back to popular culture, how many times have we seen movies where there's some threat to the country and the president, whoever the actor is who plays the president, Harrison Ford or Bill Pullman or Bill Paxton, one of the Bills, whoever it was, they go down to the Situation Room and we have this sense of what the Situation Room is like. Yeah. This is the actual Situation Room, which I'm going to say to you, I'm not sure that I've ever actually seen from this angle. Talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Like even the show The West Wing, which was made in the 90s, Situation Room looked much more sophisticated than it really is.
Yeah.
I love this perspective because it also shows little details. Like on the left of the photograph, you see the screen, top secret SCI, which we've been hearing a lot about lately. SCI meaning special compartmented information, the very highest level security.
Confidentiality, right, and security. Yeah.
And then also the ability to pipe in on video other aides. You see the FBI director, Jim Comey.
Right there in the bottom.
You see the vice president is on Air Force Two. Wow. And they are able to pipe him in. Samantha Power from the UN and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I wanted to show sort of the angle without showing the president of kind of like what he's seeing when somebody's making a presentation to him.
Yeah. So let's go to the next picture and let's stay with the point you just made. The next picture is Girls Nation. The girls of Girls Nation are in the East Room, and they're about to have a moment with the President of the United States, who we see in the foreground from behind, approaching the East Room. I was struck by this when I saw this picture, and you've now mentioned it twice, the rare sighting of Barack Obama in a book about Barack Obama's presidency. Obviously, a conscious decision on your part to not show the guy who we would all recognize and who would probably distract us from the task at hand, which is to see the inner workings of this administration.
Right. I mean, I've already done a book about Barack Obama, the president, and this is about his presidency. So as you say, this is one of the few photos where he's recognizable, from behind. Yep. He's got those ears that you can't
miss those ears from a mile.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And the way it works is he had taken the elevator up from the ground floor to the state floor. I'm in the elevator with him.
Yep.
And as he's getting ready to walk down the cross hall into the East Room, I'm right behind him, walking with him. Yep. Because I always tried to show things sometimes from his perspective. And you can sort of see when you look at this photograph close, the reaction of the kids in the East Room spotting him, coming towards him. I'll point out one other thing.
Yeah.
Is you see the portrait of Bill Clinton on the wall on the left there.
Yes.
I was at the portrait unveiling, what was that, 2 weeks ago, I guess, or a week and a half ago, at the White House of President Obama's official White House portrait. It now hangs where that portrait of Clinton is.
So that's how that works? They shuffle them? Is that how it goes?
What they do is they put up the two most recent presidents in the grand foyer, is what we call it.
Oh, right.
And so Bush 43 and Clinton were there, and now it's Bush 43 and Obama.
Fascinating, because there's not been a Trump unveiling.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the look on the faces of the girls. When people see this picture up close, if they get the book, we've got it, of course, displayed. But to me, the look on their faces, oh, my God, there he is.
Right.
Right? Again, you spend all your time with this guy. Many of us who work in the news or have been around politics are maybe desensitized to the enormity of that moment for the average person. But these are girls for whom this is really a moment that they'll remember all their lives. And you can see that on their faces in this picture. Right?
Yep.
Clear as a bell. All right, let's go on to the next picture. I really like this. This is a state dinner for Angela Merkel, who had received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And the president hosted something for Angela Merkel, who was the leader of Germany. And I love this picture in part because when I looked at it, I thought, if you had not told me this was the White House, or this was the grounds of the White House, I never would have known it. It looks different to me. The color and the angle, the location, these are maybe parts of the grounds that we don't necessarily see or don't see from this angle. And it's, again, an illustration to me, Pete, of we think we know the White House, we think we've seen this, but it's very surprising to me. I mean, I literally would not have known that that's what this was. Well,
it turns out, Evan, that there is a roof above the West Wing.
Yeah.
And there's a little spiral staircase that you can take to get up to the roof. And so I made arrangements with the Secret Service so that I could go up there at some point during the dinner to make this photograph. So I'm standing essentially above, between the cabinet room and the Oval Office, on the roof, making this image. That's how this came about.
So let's stop there for a second before we move on. And I want to note something you just said. I made arrangements with the Secret Service. You have the equivalent of an all-access pass to be anywhere in the White House, in any room, with anybody, doing anything that you want, right? Your role allowed you unfettered access. And so asking the Secret Service, can I please go on the roof? They were going to say yes. Right? You have access.
Right. I guess I didn't ask. I said, hey, can you unlock the door for me?
Right. None of us want to tell the Secret Service anything, but you probably...
No, but anytime I'm doing something like that, or if I'm outside the Oval Office shooting through the windows, I would always alert the Secret Service because, as you most people probably know, there's guys on the roof of the main White House with binoculars and, let's say, weapons. And so I just want to let them know that I'm going to be, doing that.
Yeah. And I think you're right in the introduction that when you started out in this role, there's a protocol that you go through to get access to the building, and that for a while you showed your badge, and eventually they came to understand, well, this is Pete Souza, he gets access, and you no longer had to show your badge. I mean, at some point you just basically become almost invisible to these folks, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably an asset for a photographer, by the way, too, right?
For sure.
Because people behave in a way that's much more authentic. All right, the next picture I wanted to look at was the Easter egg roll on the White House lawn, and just sort of people on the White House lawn. I really loved the perspective of this picture in terms of how it set the White House in the context of the rest of the city. How you could see the Washington Monument. You sort of place the White House grounds in the context of the footprint of the city. But also, as you refer to it and others have referred to it over time, the people's house aspect of this is on display here, right? This is average people coming to what is not the president's house, but it's our house. It's our government.
Right.
And sometimes we forget that.
Right. And just a little bit about the making of this photograph. This is shot from the Truman balcony.
Okay.
The Truman balcony. And so I think when the president was having lunch this day, he actually wasn't on the lawn. He had been out at the Easter egg roll earlier in the day. But when he was eating lunch, I made arrangements with the White House usher to go up to the private residence. So I had to walk through basically their home to get to the Truman balcony, which the door, of course, is locked. And he unlocked the door for me so I could make this picture. So I relied a lot. Oftentimes, I would rely a lot on some of the permanent White House staff to, help me accomplish a picture like this.
Yeah, And, again, back to something you said at the beginning of this conversation, you wanted us to meet the people behind the scenes who make all this stuff happen. All throughout this book are people whose names we don't know, whose faces we don't know. But without them, we would not have the government we have. We would not have the administration or the White House apparatus that we have. They're integral to the workings of stuff. They're the people who never get the credit, right?
Yeah, no, that's totally right. And I did try to profile many of them in the book, as you pointed out.
Yeah. The last picture I picked because, well, this is a home game. Here we are talking at the Texas Tribune Festival. And this is a picture shot in what I have to say is now the dear departed Magnolia Cafe on Lake Austin Boulevard in Austin, Magnolia Cafe West, a restaurant that closed, I believe, during the pandemic, no longer exists. But I remember when the president came to Austin, it was an event, I think, on small business or the economy or something, and he met with folks. He met with people, regular people. Maybe the affordability anyway, but it was something in that space. And he's sitting in a booth, you can't see it in the frame, with regular folks in Austin, Texas on this day. And the picture, as we have on screen, shows people elsewhere in the restaurant taking selfies over their shoulder with the president back behind them.
Right.
and I just love the simplicity of this, the humanity of it. It's also not a surprise that people would do that, but what a great picture.
Well, I think it speaks to this period of time in history when this is what people do now is try, you've got to get a selfie. And one thing how this works is this is what was called an off the record movement, meaning that there was very little advance notice that he was coming to this restaurant.
Right.
And so, but whoever happens to be in the restaurant when he shows up can stay there. They're
not going to be kicked out just because the president.
They're not going to be kicked out.
Right.
And so that's these young women just happen to be in the restaurant and
lucky day.
Lucky day for them.
A trip to Magnolia Cafe was always good, but maybe never as good as actually on that day. So one of the things you talk about, so thank you, Pete, for giving us the opportunity to put just a sampling of the photos up. They're just amazing images. And again, I think people are going to love spending time as I did with this book. You talk in this book, again, back to the people who work at the White House, the people who are the behind the scenes people. You use a phrase I've not really heard before, the forever bond, that you and the other people who do this work together to serve the president, to serve the country, have this bond for having done that. Can you talk about that and the connection that you make with these people over time?
Sure. I mean, let's first talk about the president of the United States.
Right.
Every emotion that he went through as president, I was in the room for. The good times, the bad times, and no one else had that kind of presence to him in those moments other than me. I mean, there's certainly, the national security folks were always there when there was a national security issue and domestic folks and, his family was there during family moments, but I'm sort of the only one who was in all those different compartments of his life. And so I think because of that, there's a bond between us that, is unique.
Yeah.
And then staff. Okay. The Obama staff. So that first picture you showed of Ferial and Brian, I spent more time with them than any other White House staff people because their office was in the outer Oval where I tended to hang out when I wasn't in the Oval or in the sitting room or on the road. And so, Brian and Ferial were my work family.
Right.
And to this day, we're still on a text
super
chain.
Close. Yeah.
Yeah. We're on a text chain and we're always texting each other.
Yeah.
And then let's take it to the permanent White House staff. This is meaning the butlers, the uniform division of the Secret Service, the chefs and the flower shop. Those people stay no matter who the president is. And so like when I went back for the portrait unveiling the other day, I hadn't seen any of these people for the most part since January 20th, 2017.
So it's like a family reunion.
It was a family reunion. I mean, even like, I think one of the first people I saw was a Secret Service agent, that the uniform division, meaning that he's assigned to the White House. And then I saw, one of the butlers, and so it was kind of like old home week.
I believe it. You talked about the relationship with the president. I want to extend that out to the family, to the Obama family, because you didn't just photograph President Obama, over time, you had occasion to photograph Mrs. Obama. And, you know, there has to be an implicit understanding within the family that you're going to have access, that you're going to keep everything that you see private, confidential. You know, you're in intimate settings with these folks over time. And it was the same way with the Reagans, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the kinds of conversations you have on the front of an administration that essentially establish the parameters, set the terms, the arrangement that you're going to have, and how is that different over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Reagans, it was more his relationship with Nancy, because the family was obviously adults and they actually weren't around that much. Although Maureen, Reagan's daughter, lived at the White House quite a bit. I mean, stayed at the White House quite a bit. With the Obamas, it was different. You know, Sasha and Malia were 7 and 10 respectively when he was inaugurated. So it was a very young family, and that became part of my coverage. And I didn't have a conversation with him about this.
You did not have
at
a
all.
Conversation.
No, and it became a more of an intuitive thing on, you know, what should I photograph, what shouldn't I photograph. And I think about maybe, I guess, 2 years into the job, I asked for a meeting with Mrs. Obama, and I sat in her office and I said, "Look, I just want to check in with you about how I'm documenting the family. Is it too much? Is it not enough? Is it, you know, what do you think?" And she said, "No, it's just right." And I felt good. I mean, I felt like I was doing what I should be doing, documenting his relationship with his family during his presidency, but also understanding that he occasionally, with his family, is going to need some private space.
And again, you're intuitive about when that may need to be.
Exactly. Right. And I think, as I told you the other day, I mean, oftentimes, well, maybe it wasn't you that I told this to, but oftentimes, you know, there are things in the private residence that I might not be aware of, and I would often either hear from him or Mrs. Obama's chief of staff. The one that comes to mind was, "Hey, can you come to the residence on Sunday afternoon? Sasha is going to get her Taekwondo test." You know, in the solarium.
Regular family stuff.
Right, family stuff that you know, they want to document. So all those photographs are now in the National Archives.
But then, of course, Pete, I'm thinking there's the inverse of that, which is when the family says, "Look, you know, we really rather you not photograph this." Did that happen very much? Did you have an obligation to accede to the wishes of the family if they said, "Please don't photograph this"? Or did you have to show them photos after you took them and have them sign off on them?
Well, I mean, you're asking two questions. One, no, I didn't. You know, they never told me don't photograph this. But in terms of making these pictures public during the administration, we had a very we had to have 3 sets of eyes look at any picture of the girls that we were going to release. Of the girls specifically? Yeah, because we didn't want to do anything to, you know, somehow embarrass them. You know, they were not elected president, right? So the images that we made public of the girls were I would consider rare. Yeah. All right, so I want to ask you a basic question. The basic question is, if I'm a person with a camera, how do I take a picture in a way that, you know, is not necessarily Pete Souza quality, but I'm just interested in talking to one of the best photographers, as far as I'm concerned, in the world. Someone who has taken maybe as many photographs over time as anybody in the world. I'm just a regular schlemiel with a camera. Give me a tip that I can take, or give people watching this a tip that they can take that will allow them to make a great picture. Well, I mean, you know, for me, it's like years of experience. Cartier-Bresson said that his, you know, the famous French photographer said that his worst pictures were his first 10,000. So I think what happens a lot of times with, you know, since most people take pictures with their smartphone, iPhone, is they're not paying attention to the framing. Yep. And oftentimes, you know, there's going to be a pole. If there's a pole sticking out of your head when you're framing the picture, it's going to be there when the picture comes out. So it's going to be there forever. Right? It's going to be there forever. So I think one thing people don't pay attention enough to is their framing, right?
Yeah.
How you frame the picture. And the second one is the lighting.
Right.
You know, sometimes the lighting and the angle. I mean, sometimes kneeling down or, you know, standing tall is going to make a big difference in the success of an image. You know, you often see pictures that families take of their little kids and they're standing. And so I would encourage people, if you're taking pictures of your little kids, get down at their level.
Crouch.
You know,
so I love this. So framing, lighting, crouching. That's three pro tips, and this conversation is available for free. Look at what we're giving people. This is amazing. I want to ask you to end here, Pete, about two things. You've chosen to stay in the arena, as the saying goes. No longer in the White House, no longer in that job. But over the last couple of years, you have remained active and engaged in a conversation of sorts on social media about the world. During the Trump years, you know, you threw shade, as the kids say, at the 45, and then ultimately published a book literally called Shade, that was essentially a photographic compare and contrast between the Obama years and the Trump years. More recently, and again, I'm asking you this because this is Texas, somebody else might not ask you this, you have been all over Congressman Ronnie Jackson from Texas, who is formerly the White House doctor to President Trump, on social media. Every time Ronnie Jackson complains about Joe Biden or says something, you are crawling up his nose within minutes, it feels like to me, on social media. Could you talk a little bit about how you view yourself out in the world now? Are you just going all Bullworth on us now that you're no longer in a job and just telling us what you think? Or what exactly is the calculation here?
Well, the calculation was that I am a citizen. Foremost a citizen. I am not actively photographing politicians for the New York Times or Time Magazine. I wouldn't say that I'm retired, but you know, I'm not really an active photojournalist. And I saw what happened with Trump, someone who's disrespecting the office of the presidency. You know, we started out with that quote from Theodore Roosevelt. I don't think Trump would understand that, because to him, the presidency was about him, you know, only about him. And so that's where the shade thing came about. In terms of Ronnie Jackson, I mean, Ronnie Jackson was not only the White House doctor for Trump, he was the White House doctor for, assistant White House doctor for George W. Bush.
Indeed.
And then the chief physician for President Obama. In my vehicle in the motorcade, I rode in the spare limousine, which is the, you know, sort of the backup to the what we call the Beast. I sat next to Ronnie Jackson for 8 years in that vehicle, so he became a friend of mine, or so I thought.
I'm about to say, he's not. It doesn't seem like a friend of yours now, Pete.
No, I don't understand, like, how someone who was a former doctor, I mean, he calls himself a doctor, but I think he does not have a medical license anymore. But he was peddling false information about COVID. And that's what really struck me, that here's a former White House physician, a doctor, a medical doctor, who knows better, who knows that the vaccine is going to help kill this pandemic. And he was vehemently against anything like that, any health precautions involving COVID. And that really ticked me off. And so I started speaking out about that. And then he started talking about the cognitive decline of Joe Biden. Like, wait a minute, how does a guy who doesn't even see Joe Biden make this determination? He knows better. And he's doing this to score a few cheap political points. And I'm just trying not to let him get away with it.
As a citizen.
As a citizen.
As a citizen. Will you remain, Pete, will you remain a citizen if somebody, a future president, said to you, come on back in, do a third tour? Are you done?
Look, I am not, you have no idea the taxing emotionally and physically this is on one's
Can't imagine.
Life.
Can't imagine.
And it's hard to describe, but I mean, it's like I was sort of all in for 8 years, and I just could not do this job again. Matter of fact, when I went to the portrait unveiling, and it was like maybe I was there for 4 hours, I said to Biden's White House photographer, "There's no way I could do this job
again."
now.
Right? Yeah.
you know.
Well, you've done your public service, Pete. I appreciate that, and we all do. Pete Souza, thank you. Congratulations on the book. Thank you for making time to be here.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Evan. I really appreciate it.
To everybody watching, thank you so much for giving us your time. Enjoy the rest of the Texas Tribune Festival.